Welcome to the Sage Planning Solutions Podcast. Join Brad Marshall, Patrick Bennett, and Dominic Ruiz as we help you navigate life's financial obstacles and find financial freedom. We will cover the major pitfalls that can derail your journey to financial independence. Get ready to learn, grow, and prepare for your best possible financial future. Securities and advisory services offered through Cadaret Grant & Company Incorporated, a registered investment advisor and member FINRA SIPC. Cadaret Grant and Sage Planning Solutions are separate and unaffiliated entities. The information provided here is for general informational purposes only and should not be considered an individualized recommendation or personalized investment advice. Any opinions or forecasts contained herein reflect the subjective judgments and assumptions of the authors only and do not necessarily reflect the views of Cadaret Grant & Company Incorporated. Investing is subject to risks, including loss of principal invested. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. No strategy can assure a profit nor protect against loss. This information is not intended to be a substitute for specific individualized tax, legal, or investment planning advice. Neither Cadaret Grant & Company Incorporated nor its registered representatives or employees provide tax or legal services. Please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon when coordinated with individual professional advice.
Welcome to the Sage Planning Solutions Podcast. I'm your host, Dominic Ruiz, and joining me today is my co-host, Patrick Bennett. In today's episode, we'll be diving into a common challenge that many investors face, and that is the struggle of keeping up with the Joneses, and how keeping up with them can go wrong. Let's get started. Pat, as we both know, this is a relevant topic, especially right now, for two reasons. One, we just wrapped up the holiday season, and two, the equity market had a good year and coming out of the bear market in 2022. So why are these two important, right? During the holidays, folks are going to parties, they're surrounded by friends, colleagues, family members, and having conversations about money, which usually leads to us receiving calls and emails about the conversations that took place. And in your experience, what are some of the topics that you've had conversations about when it comes to this?
I think the first one is curiosity, like just good, clean curiosity as terms of, yeah, I heard about this. Is this something we should be doing? And the problem that we have as investors is we'll hear what might be a very astute long-term investor's 1.5 or 3% holding. And maybe they've owned that for 5 years, and maybe it was a private placement. There's all these things that the person that heard it, they don't know the details. They don't know the dirty road that investor had to go through to get to where he is today. So that's the first thing. And that's, people usually aren't going to tell you about, driving down the dirt road. They're just going to say, hey, I'm going 100 miles an hour on the freeway, right? That's number one. The other is, why do you own what you own? How long have you been in the market? And how clear are you with your financial goals? All of these things get lost when people get starry-eyed. And I was there. I remember in 99 and 2000, do you remember how many people were saying, hey, there's a friends and family offering for pre-IPO stock, right? That was it, man. Everybody wanted to do this. Everybody knew something. Everybody's nephew, son-in-law, neighbor's best friend's kid had a way to get involved in pre-IPO stock, right? And it's kind of like when the guy from Nigeria calls you up and says, hello, my very good friend, I need to launder $31 million. You just need 80% of it. I'll give you the rest, right? And so what happens is, it's like the Grinch's heart, it's real small, that all of a sudden it gets a little bit too big. We start to get starry-eyed and thinking about, dreams of glory for ourselves. So that's, I think, the effect that I think people get. And it's a very innocent thing, and everybody's done it. Absolutely, everybody's had that feeling. Number two is, if you are unclear about your goals, why am I investing? For how long am I investing? How much am I saving? And how much am I spending? If you're unclear on those things, anything looks good compared to what you're doing. And so what I just listed were behaviors. Investor behaviors, as you know, are going to trump investor opportunity 99.999% of the time. My dad and uncle and godfather, these guys were all stockbrokers for Dean Witter back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And they would shake their head in like the late 90s, go, man, these people are becoming instant millionaires, like deca millionaires, because their company's being taken public. this was a new phenomenon because usually the stock market is something that really wealthy families used to hedge their risk against interest rate risks, real estate, things like that. So the stock market wasn't something that was used to parlay wealth. It was something that was used as a percentage of your holdings to hedge. So all of this gets turned on its head. Schwab came in and broke down the barriers and made it accessible. And then everyone else came rushing in and had, what do you call it, the race to zero when it came to stock commission prices and things like that. So what you have is Mr. and Mrs. Main Street handicapping the stock market on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. How do we get in? How do we get involved? And a lot of it just is destructive investor behavior. And so they try that, lose some money, try that, lose some more money. You know my favorite client, right? My favorite client, I've told you this before. My favorite client is the guy who's lost $1 million. His wife won't talk to him. And he comes in, he says, Pat, we got to talk. I'm like, all right, it's time. You know, I know how I've been in the past. Once my head comes out of my rear end and I'm finally ready to listen, okay, great. I can't do this on my own. Just because there's 1,000 tools out there, it doesn't mean I should be doing it on my own, right? So getting back to what you said, when people come in and they say, hey, I heard about this. Is this something we should get involved in? I think it warrants a conversation. Yeah, what did he do? What did she do? How did they do it? Okay, fine. If that's something that's like, hey, they got involved in that 7 years ago and it's out of reach now, okay, well, good for them. I'm glad that they're successful and I'm glad we're talking. But if it's, we're chasing it now because it's, and I don't want to pick on crypto and I don't want to pick on any of these other sort of things, but usually, when does everybody rush in? When does every cab driver, when do they come in? They come in once what?
From my experience, they come in after the market's already ran up. And then, as you said, they start chasing performance. And that really leads to them constantly trying to compare themselves to everyone. And then always warrants the conversation of, how come I didn't make as much as them?
And it's hard because we play this game and it has more to do, I'll just pick on men here for a minute. It has more to do with ego, right? And then it has something to do with fear of missing out. And then it has to do with keeping up with the Joneses, right? And that is a topic that has more to do with, they have a boat, I want a boat. They have a country club membership, I want a country club membership, and all that nonsense. But also it's just something that hits down at the core of people who might say to themselves, even though I didn't put in the work, do the diligence, change my saving, change my spending, I still want the result. And I'm not going to pick on those people because that's human nature. And here's the other thing. It's been pressed into our brains with every media outlet telling you how easy it is. And it's just unfair. Not only is it unfair, it's dishonest. And so then you have this cadre of people thinking, hey, this is what I'm going to do, and here's how I'm going to do it. And the problem is that you get these, I just don't want to call them false positives, but you get these moments.
I'll go on a limb and say herd mentality, right? Following the crowd leads to bubbles and emotions. And as I had mentioned earlier, how come I didn't make as much as them? A lot of it has to do with the amount of time and your timing when you entered. They got XYZ percentage this year. Well, you're starting that same investment or whatever you want to call it in June. They started in January. How much of that percentage was made in the first 6 months versus the last 6 months? And if a majority of it was made in the first 6 months and you're getting the leftovers, well, then you got to understand that when you invested versus how much you invested.
The leftovers aren't that bad. I'll take the leftovers sometime. I'm not too proud for the leftovers. Yeah, it is hard because when, you and I have had sit downs with folks and they'll bring in statements and they'll say, here's what I did. Some people with great humility, they almost sort of take it as a mea culpa. It's like, don't do that. You're being too hard on yourself, right? Because honestly, typical investor behavior turns into what you just said. It turns into herd mentality. And you and I have never met anybody that we might look up to and admire who has ever made a ton of money from herd mentality. Maybe it's not even money. Maybe it's just they haven't succeeded in the ways that you and I might value. But what we have, the people who we do look up to, think about the people we met back in the early 2000s, right? How did they do it? Little by slow. They watched what they spent. They watched what they saved. They dollar cost averaged.
Yeah. And another thing when it comes to, because almost every year, like clockwork, after the beginning of the year, we do get these questions. I always ask every single person, the one question you should be asking everybody giving you this advice is, let me see your tax returns and let me see your statements, because that's going to warrant a completely different conversation. From my experience, many people, they boast about their winners. They never tell you about their losers. And then again, that increases the fear of missing out because, hey, so-and-so is making X, Y, and Z. But the question you should be asking is, how much did you lose to make that? Are you net positive? Let me see your tax returns and let me see your statements.
It's funny, Jack, what you're bringing into is, it reminds me, I was at a firm, big firm, corporate services group in Silicon Valley in 99, 2000, 2001. And there was this massive fool's rush in mentality. And you get people walking in the door trying to say, hey, can you get me involved in this? Can you get me involved in that? So those people burn through a lot of money real quick. And I feel bad for them because they believed what was being sold on CNBC. They were doing right. Hey, why not me? There's nothing wrong with saying that. Why not me? But when we looked at the people who really made their money, not trading into their money, but actually earned money over a long period of time, they go, what did they do? It's like, well, they owned a business. They bought real estate and held it. You know, they were moving assets from one bucket to another asset bucket, not pulling money out of the stock market to go buy stuff. And they certainly weren't doing it to get some sort of social credit by owning things, right? And that's the whole, who owns that stuff? Do you own the stuff or does the stuff own you? And that's unfortunate. And I'm not picking on those people, but we've all seen those people.
More often than not, I'm going to have to agree with that. Some of the other things that I've noticed is when people come in, they start questioning their risk tolerance. And I notice if you try to follow along with what other people are doing, it's a good recipe of blowing yourself up financially, whether it's going in debt, whether it's following an investment strategy that you think you're comfortable with because you're trying to chase returns. That's the past. So if you're focused on what's happened already, trying to think that that's going to be the forward-looking return, you have a high chance of that not happening. And go back to the fundamentals. What's your objective? What's your appetite for risk? And some of these people might be trading. And if they're trading, you know that that is not tax efficient. Some people are comfortable with that. And if it's not tax efficient, you might have had a great year, but then you're going to get a big tax liability. Nice bill from the IRS. And then where are you going to get that money from? Is it going to come out of the account? Is it going to come out of your savings account? And how is it going to impact me long term?
Those are the folks that I really worry about, are the ones who are sort of new to it. And you go up, you go down, you go up, you go down. I mean, whatever. I mean, I get it. Some people sort of shrug it off and go, oh, I'm just gambling. I'm just screwing around. But when you're making a bunch of money, you're not just screwing around. But at the end of the day, it's like the IRS is like, hey, listen, there's a bar tab here that needs to be settled. Those are the guys I really kind of worry about, just because who's going to bail them out? I don't know.
Back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, the tech bubble, it was a market frenzy where you had fear of missing out. So people wanted to participate. Everybody wanted to keep up with each other because everybody's like, hey, I bought this stock. It went up 20% over the past week, 30% in a session sometimes. And you didn't have to have conversations with folks. You can literally watch TV or go to Yahoo Finance and see all this stuff happening. Whereas today you have social media, which is, I think it just amplifies it even more. People have an even bigger fear of missing out, even bigger fear of trying to keep up with everybody else. And so when that happens, you have folks that say, I'm going to open up a side account. I'm going to take all my risk here. And when that happens, then again, you're getting to a situation where you're either going to have a big tax liability and you'll never catch up because you're always going to be chasing how much you pay, or take a risk that, hey, I got out of my element. I took too much risk and now I might have to wait X amount of years to break even if I'm lucky, or I might even not even get my money back.
So something occurred to me. As we're talking about all this stuff, we're talking about our experiences, right? The good, the bad, and the ugly. Now it's time for some ugly, because we're making ourselves sound pretty good, like slightly dunking on paper here. So here's where I have screwed up, or maybe I've perceived that I have. So you invest and markets go in cycles. And when markets go up, I start to kind of get a little bit more afraid. But as that happens, you start to see that late money kind of rush into the market, right? So my little paraphrase, and you've heard me say this many times, is I'll talk to clients, I'll say, when I start to twist my mustache, right? When I start to get hatch an evil plan, it's when can I buy $1 for 84 cents, right? When can I buy $1 for 84 cents? And in 2009, we were able to buy $1 for 68 cents. However, when I start to get nervous and start to feel more insecure, the gastronomic gauge starts to alert me, which is when I have a buck and I could sell it for $1.18. And then time goes by and I go, oh, I have that same buck and I could sell it for $1.21. And then I start to have these conversations with people about maybe we should start to get out of the market a little bit. The ones who have been around a lot, they'll go, oh, okay, yeah, all right. So you think it's the top? I go, I don't know nothing about tops. I just know that when everything's this much overvalued, we should probably, when everybody's doing one thing, we should probably start to do something a little bit different, okay? And then there are going to be some people who say, hey, taking that earlier barometer of selling a buck for $1.18, you sold here and we could have sold it up here, and you sold here and we could have sold it up here. I'm not going to play that game with you. Because at the end of the day, if you try to reach the top, we all know that story ends in tears, right? Nobody sells at the top. There's one trade. There's a handful of trades and that's it. Nobody knows what it is. However, and conversely, when the market goes down and down and down, and the black swan guy is on TV 24/7, and all of the perma bears are on TV 24/7, that's again when I start to twist my mustache and go, we got to look at starting to buy this stuff. We may not get any price volatility, price action, support for months. That may go down more. This could be a value trap. But right now, it looks like we can buy a buck for 84 cents. Now, I've done that. However, that same trade I could have got for $1.71. That hurts. And for the long-term investor, when you could look at it as, hey, we all see market cycles. They go up, they go down. I used to think they were 5 to 7 year periods. Now I'm starting to think shorter, right? But these are the people who I see have amazing returns over 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 year periods. Are the ones who are like, hey, we're going to open the kimono here for just a minute and we're going to look at how ugly things are. We have some cash. Let's go see if we can buy a buck. Let's go see if we can go scoop something for cheap. And that's why I believe in balance sheets, not trades. You are very, very good at trading. I, however, need to be slapped in the face with some leather gloves. Don't even do that. Don't ever do that again.
So I was hoping you were going to mention balance sheet. The reason why is, I talk about that all the time. The one phrase you've always said is people are looking for two things. One, simplification, aggregation. I agree with that. And I've come to terms with that. They want a piece of paper that shows, hey, this is what I have. This is what I'm worth. Versus a 50-page plan that they have no idea and they'll probably never stick to and throw it away. And you constantly have to update because, hey, things change. But going back to the balance sheet, I want to see the Joneses balance sheet. Why? I want to see how much debt they have in order for them to live the lifestyle that they have. More often than not, I'm coming to find out that a lot of the Joneses have a significant amount of debt, and times it's not efficient debt, right? Efficient debt meaning mortgage debt. That's more efficient versus an extreme amount of credit card debt, auto loans. So I'm interested in finding out what their liability looks like on a monthly basis and how efficient that is, because a lot of it's a facade trying to keep up with the Joneses and their lifestyles.
And the other thing is, and you and I have known these people, if you're looking to trade the market to get out of financial problems, that is, it's like I had shanked one into the woods and the guy gets out his 3-wood and go, I'm going to go for the grain. And you're like, oh, and you got to take your medicine, man. You're about to get cranked, right? And, sometimes we got to take an L. And for the person who just keeps withdrawing money and like, hey, where are we making more? There's probably more that can be solved with them in some real good therapy, because there's a different thing at play there that we just can't help.
Right, which leads back to what we had spoke about regarding investment policy statement in the prior episode, which we will do a segment on down the line. It is very important because you have to ask yourself, okay, these are my objective, these are my goals, this is what I'm sticking to. And again, you got to be dynamic with that stuff because life changes. And when things evolve, yeah, you update them. But if it's trying to keep up with the Joneses, that's the last thing that I want to do is update your investment policy statement, your investment objectives and your goals because of your neighbor or your friend, colleague, family member. I want to focus on you, your family, and whatever those goals are. And the reason why is because everything outside of that is noise. If you're trading, as you mentioned, to make up money, you have an emotional anchor, and the desperation is going to get into that. And it's going to hinder your ability to make a financial decision clearly, whether it's buying something, investing in something, trading something, it's going to hinder your ability to focus on the bigger picture. You're going to end up making an emotional decision.
You can't save your face and your ass at the same time, right?
That's right.
Somebody once told me, he says, the hard thing to do is almost always the right thing to do. And the easy thing to do is almost always the wrong thing to do. And I think what you're talking about here has a lot to do with what successful long-term investors do. Like, it's an inside job. You have to be able to sit down and look at each other eyeball to eyeball and have a real clear-eyed discussion of where are we going with this and what are we doing? And for a lot of our clients, it's not even a question. Like, how many times have we talked to them, broken bread with them, and when you have that kind of connection, it's really priceless and valuable. And the ones who have not done the internal work about this stuff, like, why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we investing in what we're investing in? If those questions aren't clear, you're probably, I'm just going to say you're a trader by nature, right? Not TRAIT, but trader, like a stock trader. And that's good. That can work sometimes.
And anything, investing, trading, whatever you want to call it, you have to have a process. You have to have a thesis. Before you invest money in anything, as I'd mentioned before, you really have to focus on where you're wrong. So where is my thesis incorrect? When I'm incorrect, I have to pull the plug and go back to the drawing board, right? If you don't do that, then you shouldn't be investing your own money. You should be working with someone who's going to develop a plan. Because if you're doing it yourself, you're going to have unrealistic expectations. You're going to have impulsive decisions. You'll be on social media, going down a rabbit hole. I've seen it. I've known people, and it just ends up being very ugly.
What did you say the last time we were talking? You need to be able to have someone poke your idea full of holes, and you can't be defensive about it. You just have to be, like I've asked you, where am I driving the car off the cliff here? And you get these guys on social media, oh my God, right? They're just 10 pounds of bullshit in a 5-pound bag. They're just selling something. And I don't know why they're doing what they're doing personally. And I hope people aren't getting hurt, and I hope people are making money and doing great. But anyway, that's not necessarily something we have to offer.
I think there's more bad on social media. However, I'm going to go and say, hey, there's a lot of good content on there. What does it mean for me? How does it impact me? And which is where we come in, right? Trying to just break complex things down. But I don't think following anybody on social media for investing assets, because again, it's very general, is a good idea, because you have to understand your appetite for risk. And what I had said prior, as you mentioned, is you need someone to play devil's advocate, to take the other side, ask you questions of, why does this make sense? Well, what about these factors here? And if you can come up and justify why it still makes sense, then by all means.
Well, good, man. I don't know what else to say. When you don't know what to do nothing is typically not a strategy. Hope is not a strategy. Anyway, I feel bad because sometimes I think we're sitting here talking and saying, hey, if you would have talked to us 7 to 12 or 15 or 20 years ago, you'd be doing great. Well, what does that mean for the person in their late 40s or mid 50s or early 60s who's now saying, well, I've never done this. Now, what do I do? Right? You're sitting here talking about how you could do all these great things through all these markets. And the reality is that it's contact sport. You've mentioned before, we hit singles and doubles. And if we ever did hit a home run, we weren't trying to, it just happened. And we talked to the clients about, hey, here's the good, here's the bad, and here's the ugly. Here's the good, right? This is mean distribution. Here's what we think is going to happen. There's right tail risk and there's left tail risk, right? There's economic uncertainty when things go wrong. And we can name about 20 of those off the top of our head that we've lived through, right? Pandemic, 9/11, the corporate bond market defaulting. I mean, there's a lot of things out there that no one saw it coming. It was a perfect storm. But there's also a lot to be said for let's do the simple behaviors and start now. Right? And it all starts with a conversation. And if you find a financial advisor who you can see eye to eye with, and they'll return your call and they'll tell you exactly clearly how much they're going to charge you. And if they're a fiduciary, not just some person selling products, it can be done, right? It can be done, but it's just not going to be done quickly. We're very much trained for immediate gratification. And I think the only people who are going to be satisfied with the immediate gratification are the people on the sell side inside the financial industry who are selling you stuff. The product people who are going to talk about, and I'm not going to pick on anybody here, but that's their job. And they're not evil. People respond to incentives. And We see what we want to see when we hear about these things that seem too good to be true. We don't look behind the curtain because we want to be reassured and told this thing will do for you X, Y, and Z. Very rarely do they ever. And there's no such thing as a financial certainty. Well, maybe the Department of Insurance has done the best job at that, but there's really no such thing as a financial certainty in our business. And we also believe that our industry is full of some amazing, intelligent, compassionate, empathetic people who want to see nothing more than for you to reach your financial goals. And if you're a suck up like me, I want to make you happy. And if you're a suck up like me, I don't want you waking up at 2:30 in the morning with your heart beating going, my God, I don't know how we're going to retire. I don't know how we're going to pay for this. And there's a lot more of that in our business. And maybe it's just because the schmucks have fallen away. I don't know. Maybe it's just because the longer I'm around, the less I see kind of the schmucks kind of just go do other stuff. Go do other stuff. But the ones who are pot committed, who are there to be in service of the client, ultimately, those are the ones who their heart's in the right place. I'll leave it at that.
I like base hits. Doubles are nice. Home runs, if they happen, when they happen, phenomenal. I always believe that defense wins championships. If you have a good risk management strategy, you're going to do well. The email that I've received once, maybe twice at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning about the person being up. When you do get those, you know they're not resting well. Something's on their mind, something's on their heart. Happy to have that conversation first thing in the morning, just to go back to the drawing board with them. What happened, what triggered for you to experience this emotion and keep you up at night. And it's just better to talk about it, better to address it. And so in our wrapping up here, I think we should be focused on, if you're feeling that you got to keep up with the Joneses, go back to the drawing board, reassess your financial situation, goals, and risk tolerance, rather than trying to emulate what the Joneses are doing.
I like that because you got to come home, right? You have to come home to who am I as a person? What are my core values? What are my beliefs? And for a lot of people, that's a challenging conversation to have because I don't know if they'll be able to finish it, right? And I have some sympathy for those folks. But for the others, the people who should be working with financial advisors, I think those real clear-eyed conversations, everyone's walking away smarter and better for it. Not always is something going to be actionable at the end of that meeting. Doesn't always work that way. But you can lay the groundwork for success. And what's success? It's you got to make 1,000 small decisions right over decades. I just think that's how you do it. And get away from the compulsion to fix everything real quick with doing X, Y, and Z. And yeah, we've all maybe had that fantasy of, if I just would have bought Apple or whatever. Shouldn't pick on anybody here. But it's just like, that's just not realistic. And let's be honest, the ones who did do that, a lot of them went back to the casino and they left a lot of the money that they made back on the tables. So yeah, I just think real clear-eyed conversations about here's who we are, here's what we want to be. If you were us, what would you have us do right now? And then hopefully it's somebody that you know and you like and you trust, and you can restart from there. Even if you've had bad experiences in the past, interview financial advisors. And if it's somebody who you feel like, this is somebody who I think I can get through the good and the bad and the ugly with, right? Because nobody needs a financial advisor whenever things are good. That's when I feel slightly unemployed. But when things get bad out there or things change in your life, that's when we got to talk. We got to sit down. We got to schedule some time and lots of cups of coffee over the years, right?
When markets are like they were in 2023, that is the time when advisors and investors should be looking at things in anticipation, right? Not calling tops, not selling everything and going to cash. It is making adjustments in anticipation of what if, and being well-informed. And not everything's perfect, but I'm just saying, be well-informed. If you find yourself trying to keep up with the Joneses, go back to the drawing board. If you're working by yourself, make sure you're developing a plan that's well thought out and have your long-term goals and objectives in place. Come up with a strategy. Use every resource you could probably muster up. If you're working with an advisor, make sure they're developing a plan for you. Most advisors have your best interest at heart. So please just share every piece of information you can with them. This way they know exactly what they're working with. But just be as open as you possibly can. And I think that's all I have for today, Pat. What about you?
No, I love it. Well stated.
Until then, thank you for joining in.
Thanks for listening to the Sage Planning Solutions podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. If you want more information, visit our website at sageplanningsolutions.com.